All right, everyone. It's time for me to answer the Ask Me Anything questions. So let's just jump right into it. Do you think the prospect of increased economic automation will be positive or negative for socialism and communism in the first world and also the third world? Actually, I believe it won't. In the first world, what's going to happen is there's going to become a basic income. It's absolutely inevitable if automation continues. People will be left with literally no job to go to, and that would just spur revolution. However, since we know that the bourgeoisie won't allow that, all they have to do is put a basic income. And then literally workers, already I would argue that first world workers aren't even exploited because they receive more of the wealth than they actually generate with their labor. They would be literally receiving free wealth. They would be doing absolutely nothing to generate it. And first worlders would not be able to hide behind the argument, oh yeah, well, they're employed, so therefore, same thing. It would be gone. As for the third world, there would have to be an increase in exploitation on the third world, so I suppose it would help conditions, but to how much really remains to be seen. What are your top five cigars, and what are your thoughts on the Communist Party of Canada? As a member, would be neat to know. My top five cigars, in no particular order: Sweets, Cohibas, Romeo y Julieta, Guantanamera, and yeah, I don't really have too big of a variety. I just like to mix things up, so I don't really have a lot of favorites, but my definite favorite would be definitely Cohiba. As for the Communist Party of Canada, it's just a first worldist party, and sometimes they make decisions that kind of baffle me, but really it's just another first worldist party. Do you consider George Orwell and Christopher Hitchens betrayers of socialism? Have you read anything by the African-American Marxist scholar Webb Dubois? Do you know Glenn Ford of Black Agenda Radio or Dr. Jody Dean? Those two people, no, I don't know them. And Dubois, I've never read. But I do consider Orwell and Christopher Hitchens to be betrayers of socialism. George Orwell, mainly because, well, he was a snitch. He was literally snitching out people to authorities. And the fact that he was constantly bashing the Soviet Union trying to make it look bad. So, yeah, I would consider him to be a betrayer. As for Christopher Hitchens, he's a neocon. In fact, there's a big link between Trotskyists and neocons. This was put best in an article by the LLCO, Who and What Are the Trotsky Cons. I would suggest people reading that one because it would do very well. Christopher Hitchens was a justification for imperialism. And if you're doing that, yeah, you are a betrayer. But I would really question whether or not he was even a socialist to begin with. Do you think it's possible that you can mix Mgtow with socialism? This is, like, who cares? I mean, Mgtow isn't what it claims to be. It's supposed to be men going their own way, yet that own way seems to be constantly bashing and attacking women. I would say probably no, because they would have to grow up and acknowledge that oppression against women actually exists. Now, what do you think of the KKE, the Communist Party of Greece? Also, do you think that there is a revolution potential in Greece? I would say, as it stands right now, as of this recording, no. There is no revolutionary potential in Greece. That could change. The thing is that Greece is in what we call the second world. That would be a continuum between the first and third world. I would say they're closer to the first world end, but they have the potential where something could change quickly and the situation would be different. It's like a gray area between first and third world, but as it stands right now, I really don't think that they are. As for the KKE, they're not bad. I mean, they seem to fit a second world proletariat very well, and their organization skills are actually, I find that they're pretty good. How long do you think Cuba will become a capitalist hellhole just like in the days of Batista? Do you think the Cuban people will just ask for more reforms as Cuba could still remain a wealthy country becoming a first world nation with the aid of the U.S.? Cuba will not become a first world nation. To become a first world nation, you basically have to be imperialist. So that's not going to happen right there. How long it'll take to turn into a capitalist hellhole, I honestly don't know. It would really depend on how fast reforms take place, and that's going to depend largely on Raul and what he does. Although he swears he's not going to do it, even though he's already started to do that. The Cuban people, now that's a big question, because these are people that were born and raised out of revolution itself. So it's hard to say. I think that there would be a tremendous backlash. And I think it's very possible there could be a coup from communist hardliners that return it back to the right path. I think that's very possible. As an American Marxist, may I ask what your suggestions for American Marxists / Third Worldists in America to do? We have a clear and vocal right wing in our politics. How can the left take it back? What advice do you give your Southern comrades? I would say anything anti-war is always good. The anti-war struggle is very, very important, because that's something that first world people can do. And it's something that really, really helps. Lowers pressure for the oppressed countries and makes it gives better conditions for them to be able to struggle. Well, not having the U.S. Army in your country in general would be a big benefit. Thoughts on anarchism? Also, what's your music taste? Anarchism, again, no particularly extreme view here. It's utopian socialism, as you know, largely put down by Engels in Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. Also, what's my music taste? I don't really have a taste, because I can not like a genre of music, but for some reason, I'll only like one song in that genre. It just makes no sense. It's just really all over the place and doesn't really seem to have much consistency at all. So I would say I don't really have a particular music taste, to be honest. Since the West does seem to create enemies based on previous wars to make stories, it seems to me that calling the West on these issues and their enemies seem to create, not conspiratorial, but quite frankly, something very much a part of capitalism, in the fact that the West needs enemies and war to continue. It's very much predicated on imperialism, and why mainstream parties, even yes libertarians, are very much pro-imperialist, because they never accept these facts and they never want to call themselves anti-imperialists. That is why exposing this system and building a Marxist case for building up a debate can truly invigorate the West and the left. Do you think that imperialism must be the central argument for the left to use instead of identity politics, and using ISIS and Al-Qaeda as past wars is the best way to counter populism and the radical right and capitalism in general? I would say yes. Anything anti-war in general should be the primary focus. I don't think you'll actually win Americans over on the system just has to go to war, because they pretty much will just, as you said, they won't accept that. They don't believe the system does it. I mean, if you could still buy that after Lenin's thing, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, you just don't want to. It's a severe level of cognitive dissonance. Now, while a lot of Americans are against wars, they are very much, without question, in support of their own troops, and often see their own troops as the victims of the war rather than the people that are actually perpetrating them. But again, anything anti-war is definitely worth the time to go through. It's the right struggle for where things are in the first world, so I would definitely support that. Why does capitalism produce so much debt in communist and more socialist nations like Ecuador, Venezuela, and others? They are not hammered with sanctions and blockades and tend to be more stable and less prone to recession and depressions. This is something people should know about, and quite frankly are too distracted. I'd like your response on this, because the Soviet Union and China lasted for decades without much instability and people having much more stable systems. People do not realize that capitalism in 30 killed millions of people by starvation, and why people turn to socialism and communism, yes, even nationalism. People understand more things and knew that alternatives existed. Because I believe that it's not a matter of people knowing the alternatives existed, because they did. You know, the 1930s was the best time for the Communist Party, USA. That was the best time for communists in general. If not the 20s as well. So it's there. People know it. They know it's there, but they don't want to do it. Largely because it's not in their interests. They can bring a lot of things back and make things better just by a couple of quick reforms. That's kind of the problem with capitalism. It can be reformed to a certain degree. It can be made beneficial for the people who live in the first world, but not the people that suffer the super exploitation to create those. I just used the word, sorry, my mind just blanked. Those concessions to begin with. I would say that Ecuador and Venezuela, yeah, there is more stability in the economies because they're planned. They're not left to whatever it is that the market wants to do. I would actually argue that Ecuador and Venezuela are both still capitalist countries, and that they are not immune to instability. In fact, they're the most of what they're suffering right now is because of U.S. imperialism, and that's straight out. But I would say Venezuela and Ecuador are not examples of socialist countries because they're not socialist. If you constantly say that first world working class could only lose on global communist revolution, why do you support something clearly against your own interests? Because just because something's against my own interests doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. Remember, revolution was against the interests of Marx, Engels, Che, Castro, Lenin. It was against their interests. They were class traitors. They went against their own interests in order to do what was right. Just because it's against my interests doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. If somehow there was a communist revolution in the first world, would you support it? Also, do you think Jeremy Corbyn will win and genuinely be anti-imperialist? If there was to be a communist revolution in the first world, yes, I would support it. In fact, that would disprove third worldism. And I think that's an important point to make. If an advanced industrialized country like the United States, Canada, Japan, the UK, etc., went into a full communist revolution, yes, I would support it, and it would disprove third worldism. In fact, that's one point that I like to make, is that a lot of people claim to be doing revolutionary science, but they're really not. Ask them this: if this is your ideology, and you're doing revolutionary science, what would prove you wrong? What would happen that would prove your theory incorrect? Because if you're doing science, that is how it would go. Because if you can't think of how your theory would be proven incorrect, you're not doing it. You're doing utopianism. Or you're at least being completely unscientific about it. And this is one of the things that I like to make, the points I like to make about first worldism. Marx said revolution would come from the sections of the industrial working class of the advanced nations, which did not happen. And in fact, the exact opposite happened. But this tends to be a thing that just people ignore. Marxist-Leninists just pretend that this isn't the case, and they just continue with the same theory, even though it is disproven. The working class of the advanced countries did not do revolution. It was actually even the more backward countries, with the even more oppressed people and more economically backward, that did the revolution. Maoists today, the point of Maoism is to acknowledge that that's not what happened. It was the more oppressed people. But Maoists today just seem to have completely forgotten that. And they just go on with the same straight old, Marxist-Leninist line, completely forgetting one of the points that Maoism even makes. And also, do I think Jeremy Corbyn would win? He'd be genuinely anti-imperialist? No. Because even if he did, the Parliament would find a way to throw him out. Imperialism doesn't happen because some person wants it, or some corrupt individual wants it. It happens because the system needs it to happen. So I don't think he would be genuinely anti-imperialist. I think that he would get into power and either go complete 180, which is what reformers always do. This always happens with them. Oh, it's going to be different with Bernie Sanders. Oh, it's going to be different with, Obama. It's going to be different with Corbyn. Frankly, it's not. And people keep falling for it. Where do I stand on the draft? Actually, when it comes to the first world, I believe in the draft. Now, the reason I say that is because when you've looked at anti-war movements in the advanced countries, the best example has been the United States, particularly the Vietnam War. Why? Because people were more upset that they had to go and fight it than the damage that the war was actually doing. Thus, they were more likely to resist it. They were more likely to create an opposition to the war. When the war is just killing other people, they don't seem to really care all that much. Well, you chose to go into the army and, we respect you for having done that. And we're sorry you had to go to war, but that's your job. But when it's regular people that have to go, that completely changes everything. All these, fucking war hawks, they're, blah, 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 we gotta bomb the countries, and then they never go into the military. Put them into the military, and all of a sudden, their mind changes. A draft in a first world country is a good thing because it would inherently destabilize the army itself. First world people don't want to fight. They don't. They really don't. And the people that go into the military are either completely deluded or they see it as some kind of desperate choice to make. In which case they don't really get to say anything because they voluntarily did it. When there's a draft, the resistance is better, and if there's more resistance to war, the better it is for the countries that are under imperialist oppression. At what age did you grow out of capitalism, or rather, the question everybody's wondered: how did you become a communist? What made you become a communist? Well, I wouldn't say growing out of capitalism because I wouldn't say that was the case. I would say 1 or 2 years after I left high school, because this is the greatest country in the world, there's economic opportunity for everybody, and the only people who don't have a job are the ones who just don't want to work, and anybody can succeed, blah, blah, blah. Well, then I stepped into the real world and saw, well, yeah, that's kind of a load of shit. That really is a complete load of shit. And the world didn't work the way that I was told it was going to, the way that we're all told that it's supposed to work. And then I started looking at investigations, and I happened to come across a copy of the Communist Manifesto. It's like, well, this actually kind of makes some sense. So this is interesting. Then I started researching it, and then it became, wow, this actually really explains why things are the way they are, and also explains the way they should be, and more importantly, how to make that transformation. So that's, long story short, that's how it happened. What are your favorite revolutionary songs? I know you're quite fond of Sailing the Seas, Depends on the Great Helmsman, but are there any others? There's one, At a Go, or Without a Break, depending on the translation, from the DPRK. I really like that one. But other than that, I generally don't listen to revolutionary songs. Ever consider moving to Cuba or fighting somewhere around the world? I've never thought about moving to Cuba, but I did, when I was younger, think about fighting somewhere else. But I mean, usually for, some soft kid coming from the first world, walking in the third world to fight, you're not a benefit to them. Because you're just another liability for them. They have to get you together, straighten you out, train you, and all this other stuff. It's not worth it to them to have you there unless you had some really special skill like engineering or a medical skill or something like that. But generally, just a person walking in it's frankly not worth it to them, and they would see that as kind of a waste of time. So while I did think about it, it's better that I didn't have done it. It's better that I had not done it, because I probably would have been just a pain in the ass to them. What are your thoughts on Rage Against the Machine? Can you divorce a songwriter's politics from their work? Could you still listen to music that promoted liberalism even if you thought the music itself was good? Yeah, I mean, I do. The vast majority of music is liberal anyway, so I would say it's not that big of a deal. It's like, as long as you get it, then there's really no problem. What do you think about New Democracy? Didn't it effectively pave the way for the rise of revisionism in China by allowing the national bourgeois to participate in politics? I would say that's not true. One of the things that people fail to understand about New Democracy was that it was specifically done as a measure to bridge the gap between feudalism and socialism. Normally you would have a period of capitalism, but in a country that was as underdeveloped as China, that period of capitalism was never there. And that's one of the great, I think, contradictions of Marxist theory, is that to show that in real life it's been the more backward countries that went to revolution, but you also need a period of capitalism to develop the productive forces. Now the Soviets found that out. That's why they had the new economic policy, was a limited period of state capitalism. And I'm currently working on a big video about that, so, watch out for that too. New Democracy was intended to be a way to bring everyone together to try to get through that limited period of capitalism. So it was necessary. You do have to do it. You cannot just merely skip capitalism. You can throw in a substitute like the NEP. You can throw in a substitute like New Democracy. But you can't skip it. It's part of an evolutionary process. What are your thoughts on Lefty Poll? Do you lurk there? I know you had some beef with them a while back with Lefty Poll. I don't go to Lefty Poll. I don't go to 8chan. I don't go to Chans, period. Frankly, it's an anonymous message board, and anything that's on an anonymous message board, regardless of where it is going to be complete and total shit. Because that's the very nature of an anonymous message board itself. Zizek said in a video that one major problem or reason that people are not interested in communism anymore is because there's no concrete idea or plan. Only ideas like equality, abolition of private property, etc. Do you know of any actual program / plan or group working on this? Do you think we should work on presenting something to the masses who don't understand communism or how it could work without killing the gazillion people in gulags because of the supreme government? That is actually a very big question. Now, every time a communist revolution has been achieved, there was always a particular demand. When the Bolsheviks came to power, it was peace, land, and bread. Land to those who worked on it, peace to those who wanted out of the First World War, and bread, basically economic development. All of which the Tsar was completely incapable of doing and would not have been able to do. When the revolution took place in China, it was land reform. That's what they wanted. That was what they were going to give. We will redistribute land to the people who work on it. And that's pretty simple. I mean, it's not like, how do you plan to do that? Oh, you put in legislation, you break it up, and you hand over deeds to people. So that's pretty simple. Even in Cuba, well, one of the things was land reform was their main goal right away, and then later it became industrialization. Well, how you plan to get out industrialization, well, that's a huge economic question. It can be done, but it requires very large economic models. It requires a fair amount of education on the subject. The thing is, there is nothing to offer first world people. You can't offer them land reform because how much of the population lives off the land? Like next to none. Like, you could do a revolution and offer Native Americans full control over their own land. And that would be something. But you can't make that argument to the rest of the first world population. Because they really, for the most part, they already have it. They have their needs met. And sometimes those needs are met very crappily. But they are met. There is no mass starvation in the first world. So there's nothing, I would say, it's not that there's no concrete plan. It's that there's nothing really to plan for. And I think that's the mistake that Zizek actually makes here. What are your thoughts on the critic of Maoism by Unruhe? how Marxism-Leninism should be taught to illiterate workers. Okay, to teach Marxism-Leninism to illiterate workers, first of all, I don't really know where there's really illiterate workers left in the world. Because areas of where there's illiteracy are, they're very, well, they can be large concentrations of it. When compared to the world's population, they're fairly small. So I don't really think that's a problem anymore. But if we did, we would look more towards the way Mao taught theory to people with simple expressions. And they used simple expressions because people were illiterate. These were things they could remember. We have allies even with people that aren't necessarily fully communist. You said, we shouldn't attack them. Don't hit out in all directions. We should create the theory, practice it, and then learn the difference between the two, and then create a new theory based on that. So see, theory, shit, I can't remember right now. Theory, practice, theory, and then there's unity, struggle, unity. We unify with people who have similar goals. We struggle with them over the things we disagree on. Then we unite with them again when we bring them over to our side. So yeah. Now, as for Enver Hoxha's criticism of Maoism, I think they're largely dishonest. Because some of them were completely ridiculous. Like, Enver Hoxha criticized Mao for making the peasants the focus of the revolution. You're supposed to use workers. Well, what are you supposed to do when 87% of the population is peasants? It was Wang Ming who already tried to do a workers-based revolution before Mao was the head of the party, and it failed. Well, like, what are you supposed to do? You've got, like, what? Maybe 8 to 10% of the population were actually, like, workers? Of course that didn't work. Reach the masses, specifically choose a group that is not the mass of people. I mean, come on, that's silly. That just doesn't make any sense. In other cases, he actually blatantly misquotes Mao. He says the peasants are, everything. Everything should be focused on the peasants, and they should be in control. That's not what he said. He said the peasants are a wave. And it was up to the communists to decide what were they going to do. Stand by and gesticulate at them, or climb onto the wave and lead them towards revolution. So it's things like that Hoxha was actually really, really dishonest about. Have you read economic historian Robert C. Allen Farm to Factory, a reinterpretation of Soviet Industrial Revolution? I'm curious about your thoughts on mainstream economic positive spin on the Soviet economy. That's actually the basis for the video that I'm building right now on the 5-year plans. So the answer would be, I am reading it right now, and that's going to be the basis for the long video that I'm going to make on it. Do you believe the pornography, prostitution, sex industry in general should be banned, as they are in many existed Marxist-Leninist states? I think that they should be I'll say the Nordic model. They should be decriminalized, and they should criminalize, actually, for prostitution, you decriminalize the selling of it, and you criminalize the buying of it, because that's the one thing that has actually worked in reducing prostitution and reducing harm to prostituted women. So I would say that is scientifically the best thing to do. As for porn, I would just ban it right out. Like, it's just completely exploitative garbage. It serves absolutely no purpose, and it just turns human sexuality into a commodity. And commodification is something we're supposed to be against. What do you think of Xi Jinping and the current state of the Communist Party of China? It's basically a very heavily Keynesian society with a lot of state-owned industry. So that it's just capitalist, and Xi Jinping is no different than the guy before him. He said a lot of shit about getting rid of corruption, and talking about how all lead the way for criticism, bombard the headquarters, invoking the image of Mao. But it's like, You support capitalism. What the fuck are you doing? Any thoughts on Laos? It seems to have forgotten the forgotten Marxist-Leninist state. Laos is not a Marxist-Leninist state. It is capitalist, but I don't know any specifics about their political situation right now, so I wouldn't know. So I wouldn't know any specifics, but it's not a socialist state. What are your opinions of the Young Communist League in Canada? Pretty much is the same as the Communist Party of Canada. There's nothing particularly. It's just a first worldist group. If America really is a white supremacist society, why do Asians do better than whites on almost every metric? Higher incomes, higher college graduation rates, lower arrest rates, higher test scores, higher IQs, etc. Because it still promotes the idea of whiteness being superior to all others. Just because they promote white superiority doesn't mean it's necessarily technically correct. But again, it is more complicated than people make it out to be. It's not just as simple of, oh, evil white people, therefore. I mean, that's the very SJW position on it. It's much more complicated than they actually make it out to be. But to answer your question, it's still white supremacy that believes in the superiority of whites, even if in certain situations that's not technically correct. How has YouTube changed in the years you've been content-wise active, and do you think there are viable alternatives to YouTube? There's no alternative to YouTube. Nothing that comes anywhere close to having the kind of power that YouTube has, and that's just the nature of capitalism. Capital concentrates and reduces the number of competition. And in this case, it in terms of online video streaming, where the viewers are the creators of content, YouTube is on the top. Now, YouTube has changed significantly. When I started, it was about we're coming close to about 8 years ago. Anybody had a decent shot. If their stuff was good, they could build it up. But now it's basically impossible. You have to be right there, owned by a corporation, a large corporation, or you're not going to get in at all. Like, you're just done. You're just not going to get any views. There are exceptions to this. Particularly, I would say Life of Boris is an exception. Mainly because he does gaming and he has the whole Slavish shtick going on, which nobody else is doing. So he's got a very unique twist to what's already being done, and you would need that, and you would need something to really boost you up. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, no. It's not a viable thing to do anymore. In fact, if even PewDiePie is complaining about getting screwed over, then you can imagine how much the smaller YouTubers are getting screwed over. I mean, even think about The Amazing Atheist. He started years ago when it was possible for smaller YouTubers to blow up like that. So even then, I'm just citing him as an example. That's the kind of thing that really doesn't happen anymore. What are your thoughts on the institution of marriage in this day and age? Do you listen? There's a bunch of questions. Let's answer them one at a time. Marriage? Do it if you want. I don't really care. It's not necessary. It's a hangover from the feudal era, but, whatever. If you want to get married and you love each other, go ahead. I don't think it's a big deal. Do I listen to K-pop? No, I don't. Do you like QT girl groups or the sexy kind? Frankly, I don't listen to them. Do you listen to Digent? I don't know what that is. I'm going to say no. How thrall are you even if you are new to the genre? I don't know what that means, so I'm going to say no. One criticism about the Soviet Union was that the latter became imperialist itself. Did this happen because wrong policies or the dependency on the Eastern Bloc countries from the Soviet Union? And if the latter, would this mean that future revolutions would have to build up industry, militarily, and agriculture in every country? Yes, the Soviet Union did become imperialist in the later years. Essentially, they took the Eastern Bloc and made the Eastern Bloc subservient to the Soviet Union in very much the same way that imperialist countries force the occupied countries to become subservient to them. And this very much did happen. This was what took place in the revisionist era. This is what we call social imperialism, where it is imperialism, but it has a very socialist flair to it. But you couldn't really call it socialism, which is why the term social imperialism is used. Would future revolutions have to build up industry, military, and agriculture in every country? I would say yes. I would say that's the right thing to do. You do have to industrialize, period. If you want to cure poverty, yes, you do have to industrialize. As it's always good to have a military, and as for agriculture, you do want to be self-sustaining. What do you think of the YouTube channel China Uncensored? And I dare you to say a good thing about Trotsky. China Uncensored, usually it's like complete bullshit. It's like bullshit to the point of like it's where it's worse than Fox News. Like it's not even stuff taken out of context where it's just outright made up. But that's my opinion of them. What can I say about Trotsky? Despite all of his flaws, he really did want revolution. He just had the wrong ideas about how to do it. So, there you go. There's something you could say about him. As a third worldist, at what point would you support a revolution in the first world? Honestly, if it could win, then I would. Why exactly do you feel a state vanguard party would be more resistant to bourgeois counter-revolution than an anarchist or left communist revolution? The fact is, the anarchist and left communist revolution were completely, frankly, incompetent. They couldn't achieve anything. They couldn't, like, even the Spanish anarchists ended up joining the government. It's a complete and utter disorganization. And that disorganization is based on very individualist principles. Don't tell me what to do. I should be able to do whatever I want. It's very hyper-individualist. And that's actually where ANCAPs get it from. Even though that's not what anarchism is. Like, you can't say that ANCAPs are anarchists. But that's where they get that kind of idea from. And for the last question, as your mouse third world is living in the first world, what do you find your political purpose is? Since there's no revolution potential here in the first world, why not go help catalyze progress in the third? My answer to that would be, I think I've already fallen into the role of speaker, the person who's out there, a news broadcaster to whatever degree you find me to be. I think that's my role. I kind of fell into it, and now I'm here. And honestly, what really use would I be to any third world country? I don't have any particularly useful skills. I would frankly just be a drain on their resources. I don't think that I'd be very valuable to them at all. So I think that would be... I don't think I'd be any benefit to them. Do they really need another doughy white guy that they have to take care of? You know, I mean, I'd be just a drain on their resources. It wouldn't be much help. But I think I've already found my place here, doing this, which I've been doing now, as I said, for 8 years. And I think I do a fairly good job of it. And I really don't think I'd be very much help for catalyzing progress in the third world. Well, that's all the questions without making this video like insanely long. There were a lot of doubles in questions, like people asking the same thing, and some other ones that I just didn't have time for, and ones that were outright trolls, and they weren't answered for obvious reasons. So I'm gonna do this again. I don't know when, but it should be, should be interesting. And I thank you for watching. Rate, comment, subscribe, share on social media, blah blah blah. Go over to the bookstore, blah blah blah. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, Comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.